Hey everyone, Road Breach here, and today we're looking at the Warbotron Jinbao knockoff Bruticus. This is the first third-party Transformers toy that I'm looking at on my channel, and what a way to start. For those uninitiated, third-party Transformers toys are Transformers toys that aren't officially sanctioned by Takara or Hasbro. And this toy right here is also an oversized knockoff of Warbotron's take on Bruticus. So this set is pretty much borderline illegal. I'm expecting Hasbro is going to bust down my door for owning this. But before that happens, let's look at what I'm getting busted for. Let's start off with Swindle. Swindle's vehicle mode is that of a Hummer, and the detail here is pretty good. The vehicle mode isn't exactly what Swindle transformed into in the G1 cartoon, but I like that Warbotron decided to put their own spin on this character, which applies to the whole set, of course. But there are some things that look a little off about this mode. The windshield wipers aren't picked out in paint, and the feet are just sitting on the bed of the Hummer. I know that this is a knockoff of an early third-party offering, but these are still things that I take issue with in this mode. But you can take Swindle's weapons and peg them into the back, and Swindle's weapons are pretty cool, this purple cannon especially. Let's get down to the transformation. The robot mode looks pretty good. The closest thing I could compare this design to is the Cybertron video game aesthetic. I like this aesthetic over trying to go all in on the G1 accuracy because there's more to look at than big empty spaces. But I do have some complaints about the robot mode. The front tires are just messily hanging off the shoulders, and the back kibble hangs low, much like my respect for Marvel. I also forgot a step in the transformation. The front of the Hummer is supposed to go on his back and fill out the kibble, and it makes use of the joint that's on the front guard. I very much prefer to have the front of the vehicle as the chest of the robot. The head sculpt is pretty good. This smile shows plenty of personality, though I do feel like the teeth should have been picked out in paint. As for the weapons, his hand can open, and he can hold them like so. However, it's really hard to get the purple cannon into his hand because the handle is too thick. Articulation is also pretty similar across the whole set, which is to say pretty good, but very standard. Swindle is a pretty good figure, so let's move on. Next up we have Brawl, whose vehicle mode is that of an M1 Abrams tank, or at least that's what it looks very similar to with the general shape of the tank. And the mechanical detail all over is pretty good. That said, there are some strange little details all over the tank, like these purple bits on the back of the turret, this yellow sight which will become more relevant later, these hinges on the sides, and of course the robot feet hanging off the back. One thing that I've done is used the longer peg underneath the turret, because if I used the shorter one, then the turret wouldn't turn as easily, and it would have run into the robot kibble. Speaking of which, the tank turret can swivel and raise up and down. One problem that I have with the turret is the sides of the turret are a separate piece and isn't pegged into the front of the actual gun. As for weaponry, you can take these two guns and peg them into here or here. And the final thing about this tank, it can't actually roll. I know that this is an adult collectible, but come on, I would have liked that. I'm pretty sure anybody would have liked that. Besides that, let's get to robot mode. The robot mode looks pretty good, but he looks way slimmer than you'd probably want or expect from a robot that turns into a tank. I don't know how I should feel about these bits of lavender on the abdomen. They're just there and nowhere else on the figure. But a couple of things I do know how to feel about are the shoulders and feet. This is a knockoff of Warbotron's take on Bruticus. This certain tier of knockoff toys can have notable improvements on the genuine article, but not only are his shoulders way too close to his chest, but his heel spurs are looser than my grasp on quantum mechanics. Trying to get him to stand up on his own is more obnoxious than PC elitists. Not helping is putting the turret on the back, but you can take the turret apart and turn it into a shield and a gun. And this thing is pretty long. It's been a while since I've been able to do that. I'm thrilled that I get to do that again. The articulation is roughly the same as Swindle, but the loose shoulders and heels make posability not as good. I'm also not a fan of these elbows being able to bend backwards. The head sculpt is pretty good. It looks cold and aggressive with the visor and faceplate. Not as good of a figure, but let's move on. Vortex in vehicle mode looks pretty alright. The integrated gun is a nice touch, but it's very obvious that whatever these were supposed to be are his arms. I also don't like how close the tail wings and rotor are to the main rotor. I also don't like that the tail rotor is cast in translucent yellow plastic. What was the thought process here? It looks fucking stupid. There are also these pieces that you're supposed to peg on, and I'm not entirely sure what they're supposed to be. He also has landing gear that you can flip out, but you really have to try and balance the craft because the landing gear is not optimally placed. As for weapons, you get these two guns, which you can peg onto here. As if this wasn't enough of a mess already. Let's get to the transformation. The robot mode looks pretty cool, and the kibble is handled pretty well. The tail wings folding up and flattening against the lower legs was a simple but effective method to handle what would have been some pretty bad kibble if it hadn't been addressed. Something that admittedly helps with kibble management is the front coming off and becoming a gun in robot mode. It's not something that I'm too keen on, because I think Transformers figures should be able to integrate kibble into the robot mode. I'm also not a fan of the head sculpt. If I didn't know any better, I'd assume he was a drone that had no personality whatsoever. As for weaponry in robot mode, these guns cannot be held in his hands, but they can be pegged onto his forearm. And like I mentioned earlier, the front of the helicopter can be turned into a gun and be held in his hand. The rotor blades can also come out and be used as swords. Like I said, the articulation is pretty similar across the whole set. Pretty good, but I don't like the parts forming. Now on to Blastoff. I quite like this space shuttle. It's obviously not a realistic looking shuttle by any means, but it's a good looking craft nonetheless. Though if you want to talk about unrealistic, then look at Power of the Prime's Blastoff. One thing that I don't like about it is the fact that there's only 2 thrusters on the back. Another thing I'm not thrilled about is how the wing joints aren't that tight and they don't lock in. He also has some flip-out landing gear. He has some real wheels here, and some fake ones at the back. One cool thing you can do is take the combined mode parts and put them together to make a launch pad, and peg him in like this. Looks a little ridiculous, but at least you can do something with these pieces. You hear that, Zeta Toys? How about you actually hire some actual engineers? For weaponry, he gets these 2 blasters, which you can peg onto the sides and under his wings. Let's get to robot mode. This robot mode sucks! Nah, I'm just kidding. The robot mode looks good. The dark purple upper arms and thighs are good additions to help break up all the brown. And I like how the side panels wrap onto the front of the forearms. The wings wrapping around the calves works pretty well too. The head sculpt is also pretty good, and very angry. If I were to complain, I'd say that the shoulder pads are rather large, and there's parts forming for kibble management once again. This chunk of the kibble becomes a set of rocket launchers that he can either hold in his hands or attach to his forearms. But he can also hold the blasters from earlier. Pretty good figure overall. Finally, onto Onslaught. Now this truck is rather thick, and he's arguably the most stylized out of the whole set. On his own, he doesn't really look very militaristic, which is kind of the point of the Combaticons. After looking at a couple of military trucks on Bing, I found a few examples of unarmed military trucks that this could be similar to. But coming back to the actual truck itself, I feel like the front of the truck looks better than the back, because when you look at the back, you start to see a bunch of kibble, like the combine mode head, the crotch, and the robot mode shins. There's also no taillights on the back, which is something that Swindle was able to do right. It just looks like a mess back here. But this truck is incomplete right now.
You're incomplete.
The instructions want you to add the chest plate, the trailer, and the guns. Now this truck feels more militaristic and more complete, even if there's new kibble here. Man, this truck is really long. Twice in one video. Now we're talking. It's also strange that the wheels on the trailer are smaller than the wheels on the actual truck. As for weapons, you can already see the massive guns on top, but you also get some missiles. Time for the transformation. The robot mode isn't that good. The halves of the truck nose are so big and cumbersome that it's distracting. These green flaps feel like an afterthought, and there's a big gaping hole in the side. I put the wheels up like this to make room for the outward movement, which looks worse than how it should be, but the head sculpt is pretty good. For weapons, you can take the cannons from earlier and put them in his hands, but you need to rotate the forearms around because the pegs will get in the way if you don't. I also like to take the missiles and plug them into his hips and under the green flaps. Not horrendous, but not the best out of the set. Unlike the last set that I looked at previously, the separate robots feel more like individuals. But now that we've looked at each bot individually, let's get into the main event.
Into their mind, they never talk.
This thing is absolutely massive, and it's a cool stylized version of the original design. However, I'm not a fan of how Blastoff's arms are just hanging out there. The head sculpt is really good, and adds to the intimidating presence. One big problem with this design is the backpack. Instead of using Onslaught's legs as the combined mode thighs, this set uses the trailer as the combined mode thighs, and gives the combined mode this massive backpack that makes posability an unfun challenge. As for weaponry, you get this absolutely massive rifle that pegs into his hands. And like I've mentioned, this guy is massive. Overall, this set is alright. I like the design aesthetic of this set, and even though it is a knockoff, the plastic is strong, and most of the joints are tight enough to where you'd be forgiven for not knowing that. I'm not a fan of some of the design choices here, but I can understand some of them because this is an early third-party Transformer toy. That's all for now. Thanks for watching, and gotta zoom. FBI, open! Oh shit.